Xenia Alice stood still in the grand doorway of the Leon estate, her hand gently gripping the worn strap of her old leather bag. The mansion, an opulent white stone, glass, and steel structure, looked like it had stepped straight out of an interior design magazine. But the living room told a completely different story. Pillow stuffing fell like snow across the Persian rug. Smears of paint slashed haphazardly across the cream-colored walls. A shattered crystal vase lay in pieces beneath the fireplace. And at the center of this miniature cyclone were 3 identical little boys, around 6 years old. "Don't come any closer," shouted the one in the middle, his small voice sharp with warning. "We don't need another fake nanny pretending to be nice." That was Leo, the oldest by 2 minutes, and always the first to react. Beside him stood Miles, fists clenched, eyes burning with a fire that seemed to carry the world's weight. And finally, there was Caleb, the quietest, watching silently, his eyes reflecting both suspicion and sorrow. Xenia didn't move. She didn't panic. She exhaled, slowly. Then a toy car flew through the air. It rolled to a stop right at her feet, just before the tip of her shoe. "We want our mom!" Leo screamed. "You can't replace her!" Xenia bent down to pick up the toy. Her touch so gentle, it was as if she feared breaking something fragile. She looked straight at the 3 boys, looked closely. And what she saw wasn't rebellion or mischief. It was pain. Pure, undiluted pain held in bodies too small to carry it. "I didn't come here to replace your mother," she said, her voice low and warm, like honey in a storm. "I couldn't, even if I wanted to." The boys paused. A flicker of confusion crossed Leo's face. Xenia stepped into the room, slowly, carefully. "I'm here," she continued, her eyes meeting each of theirs, "because I know what it feels like when your whole world suddenly falls apart beneath your feet." Silence, heavier than the sound of breaking furniture. No one had ever said that to them. Not the nannies before, not the therapists, not even their father, the man who buried himself in work and avoided every memory of the woman all 3 once called Mom. "You don't know anything about us," Leo said, quieter now, but still defiant. Xenia crouched down, lowering herself to their eye level. Her bag slipped from her shoulder and landed softly on the floor. "You're right. I don't. Yet. But I want to." The boys exchanged glances. The wariness remained, but something had started to shift. "I know you're angry. I know you're scared," she said gently. "I know you think that if you act out and are mean enough, I'll leave, just like the others." She smiled. Not a wide grin, but a slight, honest curve of her lips, warm and sincere. "But today, I'm not going anywhere." Leo squinted. "Why not?" Xenia stood up, brushing a few feathers off her sleeve. Her voice was steady. "Because some people are meant to stay, especially when loving gets harder." Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. All 3 boys froze. "Dad's home," Caleb whispered, pressing close to his brother. "We're gonna get yelled at," Miles murmured, his lower lip trembling. But what happened next changed everything. 6 months ago, 17 nannies had come and gone from this house. But that day, for the first time, someone didn't walk away. She stepped in. She saw them. She stayed. And so began the story of Xenia Alice, the woman who chose to walk into the storm and face it with love. If this story moved you, made you pause and think of those who stayed when others walked away, please like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading healing stories like this one. Every bit of your support helps give voice to meaningful stories. Charles Leon smiled with unwavering confidence on last month's Forbes magazine cover, his tailored gray suit reflecting the studio lights like an undeniable symbol of power. They called him the Steel Unicorn, the founder of Leon Industries, who turned a tech dream into a trillion-dollar empire. But beneath that composed smile was a man breaking a little more every day. Inside his office on the 38th floor, Charles sat in silence, hands clasped over a walnut desk, his eyes fixed on the phone vibrating for the third time that morning. He didn't need to check it to know. His assistant was calling about another school incident, or the housekeeper was reporting that the new nanny had quit. This time, it was both. "Mr. Leon." Rebecca's voice came through the receiver. "Bad news and worse news. Which do you want first?" Charles closed his eyes briefly, massaging his temple. "Start with the less terrible one. The school just called. The boys caused chaos during lunch, threw food at a teacher, and locked the supervisor in the supply closet." She paused. "They won't allow the kids back unless accompanied by a guardian." Charles nodded, unsurprised. "And the worst one?" "Nanny number 17 left a handwritten note," Rebecca said. She wrote, "Those 3 children are like demons in angel costumes. No amount of money is worth trading in my sanity." A heavy silence fell between them. Charles didn't respond right away. He stared out the glass wall, where New York City sparkled like shards of glass beneath the morning sun. In that dazzling view, no one could see the grief that had slowly strangled his heart. 6 months ago, Julia, his wife and the mother of Leo, Miles, and Caleb, left this world without warning. The accident happened while she was going to buy him a surprise birthday gift. Charles never got that gift. What he got instead was a phone call in the middle of the night, a cold emergency room, and 3 children crying soundlessly under the harsh white hospital lights. From that day on, everything collapsed. Charles had once been the kind of man who never backed down. A business problem. He solved it. A risky deal. He signed it. A tough decision. He owned it. But this pain, he was powerless. His sons were no longer the joyful boys who used to run around the yard. They had become 3 storms no one could contain. Every scream, every act of rebellion was their desperate attempt to grasp onto their mother's fading shadow. Charles had tried everything. He hired the best child psychologists, behavioral coaches, and nannies with degrees from elite academies. But they all left, each departure leaving him more helpless than before. He once believed he could fill Julia's shoes, father and mother. But every time he walked into the room and saw Caleb's vacant stare, heard Leo's furious shouting, or felt Miles's hurried, distant hug, he knew he had failed. Charles told no one, but he woke up every night at 3 a.m., not for meetings, not for Asian markets, but for nightmares. Dreams of a crushed car, of Julia smiling and vanishing into white smoke. And worse than all that were the eyes of his children, silently asking, "Why did Mom go to get a gift for you and never come back?" Guilt crept in like a cold mist, wrapping tightly around him. He had never told the kids that Julia died while doing something for him. How could he? How does a father carry that weight and still look his children in the eye daily? "What do you want me to do?" Rebecca asked softly through the phone. Charles sat quietly for a moment. "Resend the job listing. Post a new nanny opening. Double the previous salary. Maybe someone out there is still desperate enough to take this job." He hung up before Rebecca could reply. Outside, the sunlight continued to shimmer on the glass windows, as if the world was still turning just fine. But inside Charles Leon, the sun had gone out long ago, and he no longer knew how to bring back its light for himself, his 3 children, or the house that used to be a home. Elsewhere in the city, A woman named Xenia Alice was about to read a short job description that carried all the silent desperation of that broken man, seeking an experienced nanny for 3 6-year-old boys. The previous candidate found the job quite challenging. High pay for the right person. And that seemingly ordinary line would open a new chapter, not just for Charles's family, but for a woman who had grown used to living with loss and who was quietly searching for a place to call home. That afternoon, in a small apartment tucked away in Harlem, the soft patter of rain tapped steadily against the faded wooden window frame. Alice Xenia curled up in an old armchair, laptop resting on her lap, fingers scrolling endlessly through job postings, just as she had been doing for nearly 2 months. In front of her were countless repetitive job descriptions: seeking a certified nanny, preference for candidates with a child psychology degree, international experience required, qualifications she had never possessed. Each line felt like another door closing, quietly denying her existence without needing to say a word. Xenia exhaled softly, placing a hand over her heart where old scars still lingered. She knew she didn't have a dazzling academic background, nor did her resume shine with polished accolades. But she had something few ever cared about: real experience, real pain, a heart once shattered and stitched back together by resilience. She continued scrolling, intending to stop after a few more listings. Then, her eyes froze on a short, unusually simple blurb: seeking an experienced nanny for 3 6-year-old boys. Previous applicants found the job challenging. High pay for the right candidate. No frills, no sugarcoating. A brief listing, but honest. Xenia clicked on the details. The name Leon appeared, along with an address on 5th Avenue, a world far removed from where she was sitting. She hesitated momentarily, but then, as if guided by some quiet instinct, she typed Charles Leon into the search bar. Hundreds of results appeared. Founder of Leon Industries, self-made billionaire, photos at prestigious galas. But then she stopped on one article buried beneath all the polished headlines. Wife of billionaire Charles Leon, killed in a car accident while preparing a surprise birthday gift for her husband. The couple leaves behind 6-year-old triplet sons. Xenia couldn't read any further. Inside her chest, a familiar ache stirred, not out of pity, but from a deep, piercing empathy, a haunting echo of a past that had once knocked on her own heart when she was just 7. The night a fire stole her parents away in a single breath. The memories came rushing back. She remembered the flashing red lights, the scream of sirens, the thick smoke tangled in her messy curls. She remembered the first room at the emergency shelter, where adults whispered as if she couldn't hear. That child seems strong, but just wait. They all break eventually. But Xenia didn't break. Or at least, not completely. From one foster home to the next, she learned to read the eyes of those around her, to understand the rage of a child who had never been held, to recognize the fear of a little one, always bracing for goodbye. No one taught her those things. Life did. And now, looking at the sparse details about the Leon boys, Xenia didn't see a challenging job. She saw a cry for help. That night, instead of sending a conventional resume, Xenia opened a blank document and began to write. No templates, no polished formats. She wrote as if speaking to a father on the brink of collapse. Dear Mr. Leon, I don't have a degree in child development. I haven't been trained in behavior management, but I have 8 years of experience as a nanny and a childhood spent in the state's foster care system. I know that 3 boys who've lost their mother don't need someone to give them orders. They need someone who can look into their pain without flinching or turning away. I was once that child. I also broke dishes, hid in closets, and screamed if someone had the patience to stay. I'm not here for the paycheck. I'm here because I believe the hardest children to love are the ones who need love the most. If you give me a chance, I won't promise to fix everything overnight. But I do promise this. I won't leave when things get hard. Sincerely, Xenia Alice. She clicked send and watched the screen flash a confirmation. Your application has been submitted. No expectations, no illusions, just a heart that had once been fractured, ready to bet one more time on something that might still be called hope. That morning, the Leon mansion seemed cloaked in a somber veil. It wasn't raining, but sunlight couldn't pierce through the towering glass windows. The atmosphere inside was so still that Charles Leon could hear the grandfather clock ticking steadily on the wall, a sound he'd never noticed before. Rebecca, his longtime assistant, had arranged 5 interviews for the morning. All were carefully selected, their resumes impressive, and their experience extensive. But Charles didn't bother to hope. He had met perfect candidates on paper dozens of times, and all of them had walked away from his 3 sons. The first applicant arrived promptly at 9 a.m. A thin, older woman in a crisp gray dress, her hair pulled into a severe bun, as though she had stepped out of a military training academy. "Mr. Leon," she spoke in a monotone voice, "I believe in discipline and consistency. Every child can be corrected with the right system." Charles nodded politely, but his heart sank. His children didn't need to be corrected. They needed to be healed. The second was a cheerful young woman, fresh out of college, radiating positivity. "I love kids," she beamed. "With enough fun and creativity, any child will cooperate." Charles thanked her politely but distantly. That blinding sunshine couldn't cut through the fog settling over this house. The third and fourth weren't much better. One talked too much, the other was too cold. All of them were capable, but none of them understood. Then came the fifth, the last. When the door opened, Charles saw a brown-skinned woman with amber eyes step inside. No heavy makeup, no nervousness or arrogance. Her curly hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, and her earth-toned dress fit her slender but grounded frame. She wasn't the beautiful one who stunned people, but the kind who made the room feel still. "Good morning, Mr. Leon. I'm Xenia Alice," she said softly, her voice low and warm as she extended her hand with rare calm. Charles was slightly taken aback. She didn't glance around the room like she was evaluating his wealth, nor looked wary as if entering hostile territory. Instead, her gaze settled on the family photos on the wall, where Julia smiled brightly, wrapped around 3 tiny boys. "You read the application I submitted?" Charles asked, after inviting her to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. Xenia nodded. "I did. And I also read what the press has written about your family." Charles froze. A wave of tension rose in his chest. But Xenia didn't look curious, nor did she pity him. She looked at him like one human being looks at another. No more, no less. "You're not afraid?" he asked, a slight edge of challenge in his voice. 17 people before you quit." Xenia sat straight, hands resting calmly on her lap, her eyes steady. "I didn't come here to control your sons," she replied slowly. "I came to understand them." Charles's hands clenched slightly. That sentence, so simple yet so profound, hit on something he hadn't been able to name for months. "You don't have a degree in education," he said, voice dipping low, as if reminding himself. "No psychology certification. Why should I trust you?" Xenia smiled, softly, like wind rippling across water. "Because I was once a child just like your sons." The room fell into an odd, fragile silence. Charles stared at her, visibly taken aback. "I lost both my parents in a fire when I was 7, Xenia said, without a trace of dramatization. "I grew up in the foster system, moved from house to house, and I know exactly what it feels like. When the people you love disappear, and the world becomes so unfamiliar, you must scream to see if anyone is still listening." She paused, then added, "Your sons aren't trying to destroy anything. They're just testing who will leave and stay." Something in Charles's chest tightened, as if her words had reached a locked part of him. It was like she held up a mirror to his past 6 months, reflecting all the helplessness, the anger, the loneliness he'd never dared to name. "You won't be afraid if they scream at you? Throw things? Break things?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Xenia tilted her head slightly, her eyes calm and kind. "I've cared for children who set fire to their bedrooms because they were too scared to speak. I've held little ones who banged their heads against walls to see if someone would still love them." She paused, exhaled gently. "Destruction is just pain that hasn't found a way out." Another silence fell between them. Finally, Charles spoke low and unusually sincerely, saying, "When can you start?" Xenia stood, nodding lightly. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. She didn't say anything more. No promises, no theatrics. But as she walked out of the room, something inside Charles shifted, just slightly, like a passing breeze, but real. And briefly, he thought he saw Julia smiling in the photo frame, a peaceful smile. At 6:45 a.m., Manhattan was still cloaked in a thin veil of mist, like a sheer silk scarf draped over the towering buildings. Outside the Leon mansion, morning dew clung to the wooden window frames, and lavender bushes trembled gently in the breeze. The house seemed still asleep, silent after a long night in which, perhaps, no one inside had truly rested. Xenia Alice arrived on time, carrying a linen-lined basket filled with still-warm chocolate chip cookies and an ivory-colored thermos of hand-brewed black coffee from a small shop near her home. Charles Leon opened the door. He wore a white dress shirt with unbuttoned sleeves, his tie loosely knotted. His eyes were ringed with fatigue, but they held a sharper light than the day before. Perhaps he had allowed himself to hope for something for the first time in weeks. "You're earlier than I expected," he said, his voice low. Xenia smiled, lifting the thermos. "Coffee for the ones who rise before the sun, and cookies for the little hearts that like to cause trouble." He looked faintly surprised, but said nothing more. As she stepped inside, the first thing she felt wasn't wealth, absence. A silence not of peace, but of emptiness, the kind that lingers in houses that once echoed with laughter. "The boys are still asleep," Charles said as he led her into the kitchen. "But not for long." He didn't get to finish the sentence before a loud crash rang out from the staircase, followed by the thunder of 3 sets of feet charging downstairs and shouts that echoed like battle drums. Xenia calmly poured coffee into a ceramic mug and set it on the table for Charles. "Right on schedule." "Right on." And then, the chaos arrived. Leo, Miles, and Caleb burst into the kitchen like miniature hurricanes, covered in sticky syrup and cereal crumbs. The kitchen island was smeared with peanut butter. A bottle of honey rolled across the floor. Miles ran by screaming, "Catch Caleb! He dumped milk on my head!" Caleb laughed wildly, hair soaked in milk, holding an upside-down plastic bowl. Leo stood on a chair, holding a bottle of chocolate syrup above his head like a sword. Charles lunged reflexively. "Get down, you 3! But before he could shout, Xenia stepped forward. She didn't yell. She didn't frown. She smiled. "Oh, I see now," she said, feigning surprise. 3 brilliant culinary artists practicing the art of chaotic gourmet, right? The boys froze. Leo stood on the chair, brows furrowed in confusion. Miles stopped mid-chase. Caleb peeked at her through damp, milk-soaked curls, blinking curiously. "You're not gonna yell?" Leo asked. Xenia crossed her arms, tilting her head. "Why would I? A chaotic breakfast is the signature of the elite. But now, who wants homemade cookies?" She opened the basket lid. The warm scent of chocolate chip cookies wafted through the air like a sweet enchantment. Sticky as they were, all three boys turned toward her at once. "We're not hungry," Miles muttered, though his stomach growled. "Of course," Xenia nodded solemnly, pretending to believe him. "Genius chefs live on raw syrup and peanut butter. Cookies are for ordinary kids." Leo narrowed his eyes. "You think we're ordinary?" Xenia shrugged, her eyes twinkling. "No, I think you're so extraordinary that you need someone who understands the chaos of a morning and still stays." No one said anything for a few seconds. Then Caleb stepped forward, lips pressed tight, eyes full of curiosity. "You made them?" "My mother's recipe," Xenia said softly. "I used to bake them on days when I missed her." A hush fell over the kitchen. Leo blinked, looking at the basket as if it held a secret too delicate to name. Xenia set the basket on the table. "You don't have to eat them if you don't want to. You don't even have to like me. But if you want to try, I brought milk." She pulled a fresh bottle of milk from the cloth bag beside her. Caleb glanced at Leo. Leo looked at Miles. A silent agreement was passed between them. The boys sat down at the table, hands still sticky, hair tousled, faces smudged. But their eyes were wide and gleaming, as if someone had finally touched a door no one else had dared approach. Charles, the entire time, stood behind the kitchen doorway, not intervening. He had never seen his sons stop simply because someone didn't walk away. No threats, no warnings. Just a gentle presence, strangely steady. Xenia poured milk into 3 small cups, placed them before the boys, and sat beside them, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to be accepted. "Can you tell a story?" Caleb asked offhandedly, holding half a cookie. "What kind would you like?" Xenia replied, voice light like early morning air. "A story about Mom," Leo said, not looking at anyone. "But a happy one." Xenia nodded. "I know one, about a mother who picked stars from the sky for her children, because she thought they deserved the whole universe." 3 pairs of eyes blinked. Crumbs scattered. Milk cups rested quietly on the table. And Charles Leon, who once believed he would never see his children smile again, stood still in the doorway, like a man watching a miracle begin. The morning passed in an oddly peaceful stillness, as if the air in the mansion had been transfused with something new. Charles Leon stood leaning against the wooden doorframe, his eyes fixed on the sight of his 3 sons, boys who once made him consider sending them to boarding school, who once made him feel like the most powerless father alive, now sitting at the breakfast table, sipping milk, nibbling cookies, and laughing. Not loud, hollow laughter meant to fill the emptiness, but gentle, honest smiles. Soft sounds wrapped around his heart like yarn, warm and aching all at once. Xenia still sat with them, her voice low and soothing as she told stories. Now and then, she gently tucked back a messy curl or wiped a milk stain from the edge of a sleeve. She wasn't trying to be anyone else. She simply was. Charles turned away. He didn't want anyone to see his face right now, especially not himself in the mirror at the end of the hallway. The man who once believed that working harder, longer, and better could somehow outpace grief. He returned to his office, the same room where he had once signed multi-million-dollar deals, now just a silent space filled with papers that no longer mattered. He sat in his chair, let himself sink into the soft leather, and closed his eyes momentarily. But just then, his phone rang. The screen lit up. Marcus Young, private attorney. Charles opened his eyes sharply. A cold premonition surged up his spine like ice water. "Marcus," he answered, voice steady but low. "What is it?" "Not good news, Charles." Marcus's voice was heavy and serious. "C News is airing a segment tonight. Looks like they interviewed 3 of your former nannies." Charles shut his eyes. "I assume they didn't say anything flattering." "The title is The Uncontrollable Children, Secrets Behind the Leon Family Doors," Marcus said, cutting straight to it. The story focuses on the boys' alleged severe emotional disturbances, claims of neglect, and lack of proper intervention. And it seems they're also targeting Xenia Alice. Charles gripped the armrest tightly, his knuckles turning pale. "She's only been here for less than a day." "They don't care," Marcus sighed. "To them, it's the perfect story. Billionaire loses wife. 3 unruly children. A new nanny shows up like a last resort. The media is circling, and they're going to dig deeper." A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The sky had begun to cloud over, as if even the weather sensed what was coming. "When does it air?" Charles asked, his voice hoarse. 8 p.m. "Can I stop it?" "Too late. If you want to respond, you'd better be prepared." After the call, Charles didn't return to the kitchen. Instead, he climbed the stairs to the room closed since Julia passed. The room where she once laughed every time Caleb scribbled on the sheets, where Leo would lie in her arms reading stories, where Miles left ink stains on the carpet, writing secret love notes to his preschool teacher. He opened the door. The scent was still there, lavender and vanilla. Julia's white dress from her last birthday is still hanging on the rack. Everything was frozen in time, as if even the hours had been too gentle to disturb what was left of her. Charles approached the bed, where one pillow still bore the soft indentation of Julia's head. He sat down, slowly, carefully, afraid to disturb the echoes of the past. How long had it been since he allowed himself to cry? He didn't remember. Maybe it was the first night he lay on the couch, hearing Caleb cry, "Mom," in his sleep. Perhaps it was when he realized he couldn't recall the last time his wife had hugged him. Or maybe it was this morning, when he saw his children laugh, and Julia wasn't there to see it. The feelings he had buried rose like a silent tide, not crashing, but seeping into him like water into stone. He didn't sob. The tears slipped down his cheeks, quietly soaking the collar of his shirt. They fell for a grief that had no name. For guilt, he wore it like skin. For 3 little boys, the world had already begun to misunderstand. And for the one woman brave enough to walk into that storm, now about to be dragged into it with him. When Alice knocked gently on the office door, Charles had already washed his face, adjusted his tie, and returned to the image of the cold, composed CEO. But when he saw her standing there, something inside stirred. "You holding up?" she asked. Charles nodded. "The segment airs tonight. They'll come after you too." Xenia Alice wasn't surprised. "I figured they would." "You have the right to walk away," he said, meeting her gaze. "No one would blame you." She stepped into the room, standing calmly in the soft afternoon light. No fear, no hesitation. "Charles, I didn't come here for easy," she said. "I came here to stay." Her answer wasn't a blazing act of heroism. It was quiet and resolute, like a soft pillow in a storm, or an old sweater that still carried the scent of someone lost. Charles said nothing, but the way he looked at her was enough to say everything. Night fell, wrapping the Leon mansion in a peculiar stillness, one that had replaced the crying and crashing that once echoed through its halls. The air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The soft light in the living room cast a warm amber hue across the large sofa, where Charles Leon, Xenia Alice, and the three boys sat close together, like a family not yet formed, but already familiar in shape. Leo sat in the middle, clutching a pillow tightly, his eyes watchful, as if he could sense something bad was about to unfold. Miles leaned in closer to Xenia, while Caleb, the youngest, appeared calm, though his gaze never left his father's face. At exactly 8 p.m., the television screen lit up. The C News logo spun against the familiar musical theme. A solemn news anchor appeared on screen, their voice steady but chilling. Tonight, a story shaking the media world. The family of billionaire Charles Leon, dubbed the Golden Brain of Wall Street, is facing a serious crisis within the walls of their own home. Mr. Leon's triplet sons, Leo, Miles, and Caleb, have driven 17 nannies to quit within 6 months. Some have called them unmanageable. We contacted 3 former caregivers to uncover what's happening behind the Leon residence's doors. The screen cut to a middle-aged woman in a gray sweater, her face visibly angry. "I've never seen kids like that. They threw things, scratched, and locked me in the broom closet. I honestly think they have serious psychological issues." Miles gripped Xenia's hand tightly. "A 6-year-old called me a wicked dragon and drew all over my face during nap time," scoffed a younger nanny. "I don't think that's normal behavior." Then came a proud, cold female voice. "Those children don't need a nanny. They need a psychiatrist." That statement echoed through the living room like a blade scraping skin. Charles felt all 3 of his sons shrink inward, not in self-defense, but like children who had heard too many times that they were the problem. Leo whispered, barely breathing, "Are we broken?" No one had time to respond, because suddenly, Xenia's image appeared on screen, a warped, hurried photo, framed coldly. The anchor continued. "It's been reported that a new nanny was hired yesterday, Xenia Alice, who has no formal educational degree and no child psychology certification. The question is this the right person to care for the most unmanageable children on Wall Street?" Caleb turned to Xenia, his eyes brimming with tears. "Are you gonna be fired?" Leo lowered his head, voice cracking. "It's our fault, right? You'll leave like the others." At that moment, no one spoke. The TV kept spitting out harsh words. But Xenia stood up. Not hurried, not angry. She turned off the TV. Silence cloaked the room like a thick blanket draped across the hearts of 3 children. Xenia turned around and knelt in front of them. Her gaze was gentle. Her voice was just loud enough. "Look at me." 3 young faces lifted. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. "Not because of a broadcast. Not because of 3 people who never once looked into your eyes." Miles hiccuped a little. "But they said we're broken." "You are not broken," Xenia said, her voice trembling slightly but still steady. "You're hurting, and pain is not a flaw. It's what happens when a heart that's loved too much loses too soon." Charles had remained silent until now, but he stepped forward, joining them. He sat down and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said this sooner. But you are good kids, so good that the world judged you before it even tried to understand you." Xenia looked over at Charles, her amber eyes glistening, but no tears fell. She had cried enough in her past. Now, she bore the weight for them. "People will say whatever they want about you," she continued, "but what matters isn't what they see on TV. It's what you see in the eyes of someone who truly stays." Caleb climbed into her lap. Leo leaned into his father's shoulder. Miles held both their hands. The television was off, but the heart of the Leon household had just lit up with a new flicker of hope. amid a world loud with judgment. They had found something precious and straightforward. Someone who chose to believe, chose to stay, and chose to love, even when everything was messy. The next morning's dawn crept cautiously through the thin curtains of the Leon mansion, as if even the light was afraid to disrupt the fragile atmosphere lingering inside. In the bright kitchen filled with the scent of coffee and batter, Xenia Alice stood beside the three boys, all four wearing aprons. Each apron bore a different stain, marking a clumsy but endearing effort in their baking journey. Flour in Leo's hair, a smudge of chocolate on Miles's cheek, and a few bright red drops of strawberry syrup trailing down Caleb's wrist. "Gently, just stir," Xenia reminded them, her voice as soft as morning mist. "You're not marching into battle." Caleb giggled. Miles shot his brother a look. Leo shrugged and mixed the batter like he was fighting an invisible enemy. Amid the rising laughter, no one noticed Charles Leon's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter for the 6th time in 30 minutes. On the 7th buzz, Charles reluctantly took it off silent. One glance at the screen, and his expression darkened. "The school's calling," he muttered, stepping out of the kitchen to take the call. Xenia watched him go, then turned back to the boys. "All right now, pour the batter into the tray and place the walnuts on top." When Charles returned, his footsteps carried a different weight. He stood in the doorway, phone still in hand, and his gaze was so heavy that the boys fell silent within seconds. "What happened?" Xenia asked quietly. "The school wants an emergency meeting with me and the educational advisors," Charles replied, voice measured. "They said, after last night's news segment, they received dozens of emails from other parents. Some are demanding the boys be expelled." Leo froze. Miles lowered his head. Caleb looked up, his small eyes glistening with confusion. "Anything else?" Xenia asked, staying calm. Charles nodded slowly, as if the following words were caught in his throat. "Child Services was also called. They've received a formal complaint. They might send someone to inspect the living conditions and assess my guardianship." No one in the kitchen breathed for a moment. The faint clinking of dishes came only from small, trembling hands. Miles whispered, barely audible, "Are they going to take us away?" "No," Charles said immediately, but the worry in his eyes betrayed him. "I won't let that happen." Xenia stepped forward, knelt across from the boys, and placed her hands gently on the table, as if to anchor something trembling. "Listen to me," she said. "No one can take you away from the people who love you, if you dare to show them that love is still here." Charles frowned. "What do you mean?" Xenia looked at him. "I have a suggestion. If Child Services is coming to evaluate, don't let them drop in and leave like it's another administrative inspection. Invite them to live a day with the family." "You want to turn a supervision visit into a lived experience?" Charles asked, half skeptical, half intrigued. "There's no report more honest than life," Xenia said gently. "They need to see that your sons are human hearts still learning to heal, not just a case file." Charles was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "All right," he said hoarsely. "I'll send the formal invitation." 3 days later, a drizzle fell as the Child Services vehicle approached the Leon estate gates. A woman with salt and pepper hair and a poised stance stepped out, wearing a light gray suit. The name tag on her chest read, "Marlene Rodriguez, Senior Inspector." Charles greeted her with polite formality, though his wariness was plain. "Thank you for coming. As proposed, we'd like to invite you to spend the entire day with the family, to understand the situation, not just assess it from paper." Ms. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. "This is the first time anyone suggested that, but I accept." Xenia welcomed her with a soft smile, then introduced the three boys standing behind her, eyes wide with curiosity. "Hello, ma'am." Leo spoke up, voice small but steady. "I'm Leo." "I'm Miles," said the second boy. "I'm Caleb," the youngest whispered, eyes fixed on his shoes, as if they mattered more than anyone else. Ms. Rodriguez nodded and jotted something in her small notebook. But the usual coldness one expects from someone representing authority wasn't there. The day passed in a rhythm as natural as breathing, baking, reading, walking the dog, and playing puzzle games. Xenia didn't alter a thing about her usual way of being. Charles didn't pretend to be a perfect father. They let life unfold as it was, simple, sincere, filled with soft, quiet moments. That afternoon, when a passing truck startled Miles, Ms. Rodriguez saw Alice kneel beside him without a word, simply wrapping an arm around his shoulders and humming an old lullaby. The boy rested his head on her shoulder, a single tear tracing his cheek before drying away. By sunset, Ms. Rodriguez was invited to stay for dinner. During the meal, she sat between Caleb and Charles. The little boy hesitated, then asked, "Do you have kids?" "Yes," she answered. "One daughter, 2 sons." "So, if they were ever sad enough to scream and throw stuff, would you leave them?" That question wasn't listed on any evaluation checklist. Ms. Rodriguez looked at Caleb for a long moment, then smiled. For the first time that day, "No, because that's when they'd need me the most." Dusk fell as Marlene Rodriguez, senior representative of Child Protective Services, sat alone on the porch of the Leon mansion. The teacup in her hand was still warm, and the last raindrops clung to the wooden railing, glistening like memories not yet dissolved. Just beyond the misted glass doors, Xenia Alice read a book to the three boys. Leo was sprawled out on the sofa, Miles leaned against her shoulder, and Caleb curled in her lap like a kitten that had stopped being afraid. No one sat up straight. No one forced politeness, but everyone was wholly present. Mrs. Rodriguez wrote nothing more in her notebook. Throughout the day, she had written plenty of notes on behavior, emotional responses, family structure, and the bonds between caregiver and child. But now, she could no longer write, because she had already seen everything she needed to understand, not through numbers, rigid standards, but through the eyes of a mother who had once loved deeply. The door opened, and Charles stepped onto the porch. A light breeze lifted the hem of his smoke blue dress shirt. He no longer carried the air of a powerful CEO, nor the constant strain of a single father. In his eyes now was a quiet kind of worry, the kind any man might wear when standing before something that could take away what little he had left. "Would you like more tea?" Charles asked, his voice low but courteous. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head, her eyes still on the warm light behind the glass. "You know," she began slowly, "in over 20 years of social work, I've entered homes 10 times grander than this one. Yet they felt hollow, like dry shells. I've also sat inside cramped, broken down apartments where love filled every inch of space." Charles said nothing. He just listened. "Today," she continued, gently setting her teacup down, "I saw a home. Not perfect, not quiet, but real." That sentence sent a warmth through his chest, a breath of relief he hadn't known he was holding. Charles nodded slightly, a silent thank you. "We're still learning," he said. "Me and my 3 boys and I. We're learning how to forgive, how to speak sadness aloud, how to believe someone might not leave." Mrs. Rodriguez turned, her gaze resting on Xenia Alice, who gently kissed Caleb's forehead as he drifted off to sleep. "Who is she?" she asked, not with suspicion, but with genuine curiosity. Charles smiled, taking his time to answer. He looked up at the sky before speaking softly, like a confession. She's the one thing I never dared to hope for. Who came exactly when I needed her most. At 8 p.m., after the boys had fallen into deep sleep, Charles and Xenia sat across from each other at the now cleared dining table. The hanging lamp cast a soft golden light over them, their shadows stretching across the table like an unfinished painting. "What did she say?" Xenia asked, voice quiet as a breeze. "She said we're real," Charles replied, "and that no one is taken away from a place where they're seen with the heart." Xenia exhaled, a gentle sigh of relief, and leaned back in her chair. Beneath the table, she still held the rubber bracelet Miles had given her that morning, a green band with the word courage scrawled in marker. Charles looked over at her. A quiet moment passed between them. He thought of her standing in the morning's chaos, with flour-dusted apron, steady voice, and eyes that didn't flinch. He remembered how she smoothed Miles's hair when a truck's rumble startled him. How she looked at Charles when Mrs. Rodriguez asked, "What do your sons need most?" And Xenia had answered, "The belief that they are worthy of love." "Xenia," Charles said after a long pause, "I don't think I've ever thanked you enough." She tilted her head and smiled softly. "You've done more than enough. But it still doesn't feel like enough." "No one's ever enough," she replied, her amber eyes steady and deep. "Love doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks for patience." Charles nodded, his hand unconsciously resting near hers on the cool wooden table. The distance between their hands was small, just one slight tilt, and they would touch. But neither moved, because sometimes closeness isn't in contact. It's in the quiet harmony of shared understanding. Outside, the last of the rain had stopped. The clouds parted. A faint stretch of stars appeared through the darkened window where the lights had been dimmed, like a small reward from the universe for those who dared to stay through the storm. That winter came quietly to Manhattan, not with brutal snowstorms, but with thin white frost blanketing the steps and crisp mornings that made people crave more than just a hot cup of tea, but a long, lingering embrace. Inside the Leon mansion, the antique clock still ticked steadily as always, but this was no longer a house of screaming children and a father silenced by grief. 6 months had passed like a quiet rebirth, neither grand nor dazzling, but deep enough to leave those who had witnessed it quietly astonished. Leo, the boy who once screamed at adults, thinking it was the only way not to be abandoned, was now a student guide for new kids at school. He didn't talk much, but he knew how to listen. When he placed a hand on the shoulder of a crying new student being teased, no one could have guessed this was once the dangerous child broadcast on national news. Miles, who used to hide behind his brother, terrified of loud noises, now stood before the class to tell a story about his mother. He didn't tell it in a tearful voice, but with a tenderness that made the room fall silent. "My mom used to love looking at the moon. So now, whenever I feel sad, I look up at the sky," he said. And the teacher cried, not out of pity, but of respect. Caleb, the quietest of the three, was now the first to get up when a classmate dropped a box of crayons. He didn't ask why. He just bent down and picked up each crayon with his small hands, then smiled and said, "We've all dropped something before." On the mansion's first floor, Charles Leon sat in his office. The desk was neat, but no longer cold. Among financial plans and million-dollar contracts sat a drawing from his sons, a house with a red roof, 4 figures underneath, father, 3 boys, and a woman with soft curly hair shaded in light brown. He looked at the drawing, his hand brushing the wooden frame, as if touching something truly alive. The door opened. Xenia walked in, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. She placed one in front of him, then leaned gently against the back of the chair across from his. Her beige sweater made her look so calm that even a storm would hesitate before touching her. "Your youngest just turned down chocolate," she said, smiling. "Said he has to keep his promise to Miss Xenia." "What promise?" "He wouldn't eat sweets before dinner unless you baked something." Charles chuckled, a warm and rich sound like logs crackling in a fireplace. He looked at her, his gaze lingering longer this time. "Xenia," he said quietly. She looked up, her amber eyes still and calm. "I used to think I couldn't love again," he said. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I thought I had nothing to give." The breeze softly brushed past the window, nudging the white curtain. "But then you came," he continued, "and I realized people don't love with what's still whole. They love what's already been broken." Xenia didn't answer right away. She reached for her cup, took a sip, and set it down. Her eyes rested on him. "I used to think I only belonged in the quiet spaces," she said, "with kids screaming from pain, in rooms filled with cracks. I never thought I'd be part of something people call stable." "I don't want stable," Charles whispered. "I want real." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence people hold for things that matter. They were both standing on the edge of something greater, not a fleeting love, but a bond carved slowly, carefully, deeply. Xenia stood, her hand brushing lightly across his shoulder. 3:00, she reminded him. "You promised to be at school on time today." Charles nodded, his gaze following her until she disappeared through the door. His heart no longer beat under the weight of loss, but with the quiet rhythm of something real beginning. At the elementary school, the winter festival glowed under warm yellow lights. On stage, the Leon boys stood side by side, dressed alike in white shirts, gray slacks, and red bow ties. Leo opened their small speech to parents and friends. "We used to be unfortunate kids," he said, his voice steady. "Not because we were bad, but because we didn't know how to say we were hurting." Miles continued. "Then someone came. She didn't ask us to behave before loving us. She just stayed." Caleb held his brother's hands, smiled shyly, and added, "And now, we're learning to stay. For other people." In the front row of the audience, Charles held Xenia's hand tightly. No words were needed. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was everything. The tears, the silence, the chaos, the doubt, all of it leading here, to this moment. A moment when 3 children once deemed dangerous were now teaching the world how to love, honestly, tenderly, and without fear. The final night of winter wrapped the Leon estate's back garden in a quiet so deep it ached. The brittle lavender bushes stood motionless in the breeze, like loyal sentinels guarding something sacred that once thrived here. A chill swept across the ground, carrying the scent of damp grass and leftover ash from the recent winter gathering. Charles Leon strolled along the stone path leading to the garden's center, his hand wrapped around Xenia Alice's smaller one. Her hand was warm, as if the cold could not touch her. They walked side by side, neither speaking, needing no reason to be out here, because silence was no longer a distance between them. Charles stopped at the end of the path, where an old wooden bench lay draped in a thin wool blanket. He let go of her hand and turned to face the faded lavender. "This spot," he said, voice low. "Julia used to love sitting here at the end of the day. She said lavender doesn't need much sunlight, only someone to care for it, and it will survive." Xenia stood quietly beside him, hands clasped. "At first, I avoided this place," Charles continued, his eyes never leaving the withered plants. "Not because I was afraid of remembering her, but because I was afraid of myself, afraid of the emptiness in things that were once beautiful, once happy, now reduced to remains. She didn't interrupt or offer comfort. She waited. But then one day, he said with a small smile, "I saw you standing here, watering these dry stems, talking to them like they could still hear you." Xenia let out a soft laugh, light as wind chimes. I thought, she must be a little crazy. But that same crazy brought this garden back to life. Not with flowers, but with feeling. She turned to him, the moonlight catching in her amber eyes. In that moment, she knew, though he hadn't said it yet, what was coming wouldn't be light. Charles inhaled, then turned fully toward her. He pulled a small box from his coat pocket. No gold plating, no sparkling jewels, just soft gray silk wrapping, simple enough to take one's breath away. He didn't kneel just yet. He only looked at her for a long time. "I'm not coming to you with perfection, Xenia," he said softly. "I come with cracks, past failures, and things I've been too afraid to admit." Her gaze never left his. The wind moved gently through her hair, but she didn't stir. "I once thought the love of my life ended on a rainy afternoon," he continued. "But then you came, not trying to replace anyone, not trying to fix anything, just quietly laying one brick at a time in a house I thought had already collapsed." Now, Charles knelt. One knee touched the cold ground, and his hand opened the silk box. Inside was a simple platinum ring, holding a single small stone surrounded by 3 delicate bands, like 3 little arms wrapping around a single center. "I'm not asking you to change," he said, voice tight with emotion. "I'm asking you to stay, to be the mother to 3 boys who've learned to trust your gentleness, to be the partner I didn't know I was waiting for, to be the woman I will walk beside, even through seasons without flowers." Xenia looked at him. What filled her eyes wasn't tears. It was history. The history of a heart that had endured, had learned to rise again, and now stood before a promise, not of rescue, but of sharing. She knelt too, not out of ceremony, but because her heart bowed before his sincerity. "I used to be the child no one stayed for," she said, her voice as soft as wind across an open field. "But Charles, you didn't just stay. You let me be loved without pretending to be strong." She reached out her hand, letting him slip the ring onto her finger. "And I say yes," she whispered. They didn't kiss right away. They rested their foreheads together, as if reciting a vow in a language only they understood. Upstairs, through the second-floor window, 3 boys peeked out from behind the curtain. Leo pretended not to care, but his eyes sparkled. Miles clutched his brother's arm, while Caleb whispered, half innocent, half sure, "So, Miss Xenia's staying forever." No one answered. But in the hearts of all 3 boys, the Leon family garden that day wasn't as extravagant as weddings in glossy magazines, but it was heartbreakingly beautiful. The spring sky stretched overhead in a pale blue veil, like a sheer silk draped over everything. In that quiet space, newly budding lavender released a faint, soothing fragrance, like the warm memory of a passing season. A white ribbon tied between 2 ancient oak trees formed a natural archway. Beneath it stood a long wooden table draped with a simple cream-colored linen cloth, adorned with modest flower arrangements, lavender, white peonies, a few olive branches, and wild daisies. There were no flashy guests, no rows of chairs wrapped in bows, only the closest loved ones gathered. Charles's best friend, a salt-and-pepper-haired man who'd once been his Harvard classmate and was now a freelance photographer, officiated the ceremony. The older woman from the kitchen, who had once cared for Julia, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. And up front, 3 little boys in tiny suits stood in a straight line, each holding a small card. Xenia Alice's wedding dress was a simple ivory satin gown with a square neckline and mid-length sleeves. No lace, no embellishment. Just a pale lavender ribbon tied gently at her waist, a whisper to herself that she didn't need to become anyone else. Being herself was enough. As she walked forward with her hand in Charles's, the crowd fell so silent you could hear the wind brushing through the trees. But what broke every heart wide open wasn't the vows spoken by the bride and groom. It was the moment Charles stepped back half a pace and signaled for his 3 sons to come forward. Leo was first. His voice trembled, but his eyes were full of resolve. I used to think grown-ups only made promises they didn't keep. Then Mom left. And then other people came. And left too. But Miss Xenia wasn't like that. She didn't promise much. But she kept every word, every day. So today, I want to make a promise back. He held up the little card and read slowly. I promise. I'll always protect this family, even when I grow taller than Dad. Everyone laughed. Xenia pressed her lips together to stop a sob, but tears already shimmered in her eyes. Miles stepped up next, cheeks flushed as if he were carrying something sacred inside. On her first day here, he whispered, I drew her picture and taped it inside my closet. Because I was afraid. If she left, I wouldn't remember her face. A soft breeze fluttered the edge of his card. I promise I'll remember her daily, even when I don't need to anymore, because she'll be right here, in our home. Caleb was last. He walked up slowly, the smallest of the 3, but no one saw him as little anymore. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he lifted his chin and looked at Xenia and Charles. I don't have many words, he mumbled. I just promise to call her Mom and to never stop believing she'll stay. Xenia couldn't hold back any longer. She knelt and pulled all 3 boys into her arms. No wedding bouquet, no engraved silver rings could match that embrace. That alone was worth 1,000 vows. Charles stepped forward and wrapped his arms around all of them. His eyes met Xenia's, full of something steady and profound, and said what his heart had known for a long time. None of us is lost anymore. That evening, after a small candlelit dinner and a wedding cake chosen by the boys, a vanilla sponge with chocolate shavings, and a fondant figurine of a little family on top, the house fell into a gentle quiet. Xenia sat on their bedroom windowsill, tea in hand, moonlight playing through her slightly tousled hair. Charles came up behind her, draped a thin blanket over her shoulders, and sat down beside her. You know, he whispered, the first time I saw you, I didn't think this would be your place. And me, she chuckled softly. The first time I stepped into this house, I thought this place was cold, not from the AC, but because everyone's heart was frozen. Charles was silent for a moment. Then he took her hand. And now? Now, Xenia replied gently. I just hope the wind never stops blowing through the garden. I want everything to keep going. Not perfectly, but truthfully. He nodded, said nothing more, because both of them understood. Love doesn't bloom from the dazzling. It grows from the enduring, from hands held through the storm, from noisy dinners filled with both tears and laughter, and from the children who once thought they were a burden, now becoming the very soul of a home. One April morning, when magnolia petals blanketed the porch after an overnight rain, Xenia Alice stumbled upon an old wooden box in the dusty attic of the Leon house. It lay quietly behind a stack of old books and an unframed painting. There was no lock, just a tarnished brass latch. She opened it without much thought. Inside were a few handwritten pages, some old photographs, a lace-trimmed handkerchief, and a sealed envelope pressed shut with red wax on it, in delicate, slanted handwriting. To Charles, when you're ready to understand. Xenia sat down on the floor, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know whether she should open it, but then she closed the box gently, held it close to her chest, and descended the attic stairs to find the only person with the right to touch that past. Charles was sitting in his study, the sunlight from the window casting a slanted glow on his face, revealing the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind etched by years that held more than just success. Xenia placed the box on the desk and softly said, "I found this, in the attic." He looked down. When his eyes landed on the envelope, he froze. His whole body went rigid, his hand clenched on his knee unconsciously. "It's Julia's handwriting," he whispered, as if to himself. "Do you want to open it?" Xenia asked gently. He didn't answer right away. After a moment, he nodded. Yes, not to find answers, but to finally face it. Charles opened the envelope in silence. The paper had yellowed, but the words were still clear, as if the writer had sent it precisely when it was meant to be read. Charles, I'm no longer beside you if you're reading this letter. I don't write this to be remembered, but to be forgiven. And if possible, to bring you back to yourself. We loved each other with all the innocence two young souls could offer. But I knew I was no longer the Julia I had been after having our 3 children. I became scared, panicked, jealous of your career, freedom, and dreams I no longer had the strength to chase. I pushed you away, but not for one moment did I ever stop loving you. If one day you meet someone gentle enough to open the hearts of our children, brave enough to see the good in you that you forgot, please don't hold your heart back for me. Love is not about holding on, but letting someone live fully again. And if she loves the children like her flesh and blood, then Charles, don't hesitate. Take her hand, because I know I was never the last. I was only the beginning. Julia. Charles laid the letter down on the desk, his eyes blurred, not with bitterness or regret, but with the peace that finally came after carrying so many unsaid things for so long. Xenia said nothing. She stood silently beside him, gently placing one hand on his shoulder. That touch didn't offer comfort. It was an affirmation. I'm here. That evening, Charles took Xenia and the 3 boys back to the small hometown in Vermont where he'd grown up. It was a trip he had avoided for years, because that place held memories of a time when life was carefree, and of a mother who used to store all his childhood laughter in imagined glass jars. The lakeside wooden house was still there, though the roof had faded and the fence leaned from years of wind and snow. But when Leo, Miles, and Caleb ran along the porch, their laughter sounded no different than his own once had, when he used to run there with a little sister long gone. That night, the whole family gathered around the fire pit by the lake. Charles retold old stories about the time he fell flat in a field chasing a squirrel, about getting punished by his father for secretly carving Julia's name into his school desk. And guess what? He turned to Leo. That desk still has the mark today. You're such a romantic, Dad, Miles teased, making everyone laugh. Caleb curled into Xenia's lap, voice sleepy. So, did Mama Julia love Dad the way Mama Xenia does? The question made the air still for a beat. Charles looked at Xenia, his gaze soft. Yes, but every love has its way. Mama Julia taught me how to love with all I had. Mama Xenia is teaching me how to keep that love. Xenia squeezed his hand. For the first time, she didn't feel like someone intruding on a finished chapter, but someone continuing a story that was never truly complete. On the drive back to Manhattan, Xenia sat by the car window, watching the forest ribbons drift past like streams of memory gently closing. There was an unfamiliar feeling inside her, not exuberant happiness, but a quiet, profound peace. She knew that nothing unsaid would ever hold them back from this moment on. Everything was clear now. Julia was not a shadow. She was the light of a time that had passed. And Xenia, now, was the quiet flame guiding a home forward into the days ahead. Some wounds don't bleed, but lie so deep within a person that they believe they've long since healed. One day, a voice, a glance, or an old photograph pulls it suddenly to the surface, and they realize they've never truly healed. For Xenia Alice, that moment came one early afternoon in May, when the Leon kitchen carried the scent of orange cake baking and soft classical jazz from a small speaker in the corner. Miles was bent over homework at the kitchen island. Caleb was dozing off in the lap of their lazy fat cat, and Leo was running around with the old camera Charles had just gifted him. "Miss Xenia," Leo called, holding up a freshly snapped photo. "Did you ever have any brothers or sisters?" That simple question, so innocent the way children often are, made Xenia's hand pause mid-motion over the cake. Her eyes locked on the thin orange peel in her hand, as if inside it slept a memory long dormant. "I had a little sister," she said softly, her voice so calm it surprised even her. Leo grinned brightly. "So you're the big sister then?" She nodded, light as the breeze. But that night, after the house had fallen asleep, Xenia sat alone on the back porch, holding an old photograph she'd just unearthed from the wooden box she'd brought when she left the foster center at 14. A picture of her and that little girl, who used to cling to her hand every night as they slept on a creaky iron bed. Carmen. That name rang in her heart like a forgotten note. How long had it been since she'd dared to speak it? How long had she lived as if she'd never had a sister? Carmen was 2 years younger than Xenia. When their parents died in the fire that year, they were both placed in the same orphanage in the Bronx. Carmen was fragile, often in tears. Xenia, being the older sister, had to learn to be strong. She once swore to herself, "I'll never leave her behind." But at 15, a family adopted Xenia. They wanted a child who was obedient and mature, not two. The day she left, Xenia screamed, begged, "Please take my sister too. I'll do anything. Don't separate us." But the system didn't care about tears. And so she left, carrying the first cut, a cut that didn't bleed, but made her live like someone incomplete ever since. Later, she wrote letters. At first, there were replies. But then, Carmen stopped writing. No more words. No new address. No trace. Xenia told herself that maybe Carmen had been adopted, and perhaps she had a better life. But in her dreams, she still saw her sister standing at the orphanage gate, blank-eyed, her hands no longer reaching for her sister's. That night, Charles came out to the porch after putting Caleb to sleep and found Xenia frozen like a statue. He didn't ask. He just sat beside her. She handed him the photograph. He took it and studied it for a long while. "Carmen," she whispered. "My little sister." Charles nodded slightly. "I wondered why you got so quiet every time Leo cuddled up to Miles." Xenia closed her eyes, a silent tear slipping down her cheek. "I've never told anyone. I feel like a traitor. I left Carmen in that system. And then I went on living like I was whole." Charles didn't respond right away. He placed his hand gently on her back and gave a soft pat. "You didn't go on living like you were whole. You lived to mend the broken pieces, not just yours, but for so many other children too. But what about Carmen?" Xenia turned to him. "What if she thinks I abandoned her? Then find her. Tell her you never stopped thinking about her. Whatever the answer, you still deserve forgiveness. especially from yourself. Xenia nodded faintly, as if something heavy had just been lifted from her chest. The next morning, with sunlight pouring gold through the living room window, Xenia opened her laptop and typed the first few words into a social record search. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was firm. Charles stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Leo, Miles, and Caleb gathered around, each one offering a word. She's probably just as cute as you, Mom. If we find her, can we call her Auntie? I don't think Mom's the person who leaves anyone behind. Xenia smiled, for the first time in a long while, a smile filled with hope. Inside her, the old crack remained. But light had begun to seep in for the first time, as gentle as the small hand that once held hers through the dark. At the end of that summer, the little house nestled at the edge of the forest north of Manhattan seemed a little older, yet more beautiful than ever. The roof tiles faded under the sun. The bougainvillea vines on the porch exploded like a soft flame, and the lavender garden, once the backdrop of a humble proposal, now lay blanketed in purple footprints of an entire family. In the living room, sunlight filtered gently through thin curtains, and Xenia Alice sat embroidering by the window. Her face was calm and more mature than when she set foot in the Leon household in those first seasons. Yet in her eyes still lingered the same warmth, the kind that once made three uncertain children believe in love again. Outside, Leo was building a spaceship model from recycled wood. Miles played an old piano tune Charles once taught him, and little Caleb was drawing with pastel chalk. His picture was of a house with 6 people, 3 children, 2 adults, and a third woman, standing slightly to the right. There was no name, but everyone knew. It was Carmen. After months of searching, Xenia finally reunited with her sister. The meeting looked nothing like the way she'd dreamed. Carmen, now a woman with a tattoo on her wrist, a guarded gaze, and a half smile, not a little girl needing protection, but an adult who had weathered too many storms to still believe in the idea of home. Xenia had prepared all the explanations, all the apologies, but Carmen only said, "It's good that you made it." Then silence. The visit ended in ambiguity. No tears, no hugs. But before she left, Carmen handed her a sealed envelope with only these words inside. "I'm not ready yet, but I know you never forgot me. That's enough." Those short lines opened a small door in Xenia's heart, not to return to the past, but to walk more lightly in the present. No more resentment, no need for redemption, just forgiveness. That day, Charles took the whole family to the beach. He pitched a small canvas tent in the sand, surrounded by pebbles and the sound of waves. The kids ran wild while he uncorked a bottle of red wine that had been aging in the cellar since their wedding, a bottle he once said he was saving for a truly special occasion. "Is today the special occasion?" Xenia asked, smiling. "No," Charles winked. "It's any day you smile without bracing yourself." She looked at him, then rested her head on his shoulder, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Everything around them seemed to pause. No need for applause, no need for proof. Just this moment was enough to end a journey full of scars. That night, in her old journal, Xenia wrote, "I was once a child left behind, and I once believed that love was a luxury I had to earn. But now, watching Leo invite Caleb to bake, Miles giggling as Charles drops flour everywhere, I realize true love isn't something I have to fight for. I already have it just because I dared to love again. We are not a perfect family, but we are a family where every scar is cherished as a sacred part of our story. And I know I don't have to be anyone else but myself. And that is the greatest miracle. A story ends, but love, It never truly does. If you've ever thought you weren't worthy of love, not perfect enough to belong to someone, then Xenia and Charles's story is a gentle reminder. Love doesn't find the best people. It finds the ones who dare to stay, listen, and walk through what no one else understands. If you've read this far, share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, don't hesitate to follow for more journeys to come. Because every one of us deserves a place to return to, no matter how many pieces we've been broken into. Thank you for listening to the story of Xenia Alice. See you again in those everyday dreams we call life.